His work's been displayed in a salt lake in Australia, perched on Capitol buildings in capital cities around the world. But it might be more accurate to say that these sculptures inhabit the landscape, because Antony Gormley's work is often about bodies in space, be it the built environment or the natural one. The Turner Prize-winning artist is showing new work at the Thaddeus Ropac Gallery here in Paris, and he's with us in the studio to tell us more. Antony Gormley, hello.
Hello.
Now, this latest show, Inhabit, features both sculptures and drawings, and I noticed that the central piece, which is called Run 2, has something quite graphic about it, even though it is a 3D piece. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I suppose I spent a lot of time in my studio thinking about the body less as an object than a place. And with Run 2, what I'm thinking about is architecture as a place and doing the same thing, trying to, I guess, map it, catalyze it, make an object that somehow investigates space itself and at the same time, without occupying it, energizes it. And I suppose, for me, the viewer then becomes part of the work. The work is a single line. It's about 200 meters long. It's an open tube. And I guess it connects with other things that I've made, like Passage, which was a long human silhouetted tunnel that you were invited to walk through. The show as a whole is investigating the second body. So if the first place we live is the human body, the second place we live is in the rooms and cities of our habitat.
Indeed, you can go inside that piece of work, Run 2. But for people more familiar with your past work, that piece might appear to be less human than the cast figures they've seen in a lot of your previous installations. And in fact, your whole body of work has been celebrated at a retrospective at the Royal Academy in London last year. Let's take a look at that. Just to come back to some of the human figures that we saw there briefly, some of these bodies feature in an installation called Event Horizon, which took place in various locations around the world. Now, how did you choose the spots where to put those figures? And what's the oddest or most surprising place, the surprising landscape you've seen them in?
I guess that piece has to do with making an acupuncture of a city and thinking, how can we activate that dialogue between the sky and the earth at the skyline of a city? And in New York, it was important that we got real landmarks. So we had the clock tower, we had the Empire State, we had the Flatiron Building.
And one of the places where those figures, those cast iron figures, are quite striking is in the piece Another Place on Crosby Beach, where they're sort of in and out of the water, depending on the tide. And a much earlier work of yours, Host, also involves water, flood water, a sort of soupy, muddy water. Now, Host was made in 1991, and at that time, the phrase climate crisis wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today. Was that a prophecy of sorts? Were you predicting a watery end for all of us?
No, I think that I've always been very concerned with making sculpture that engages with the public that maybe isn't even alive yet. The idea that sculpture, rather than memorializing the past, which it's done so effectively in the 18th and 19th centuries, that I think the urgency now is to make sculpture that thinks about what our human contribution may be to the future of the biosphere. And certainly the first time I made it, which was in Charleston in South Carolina, I was thinking more about, you could say, the beginning and ending of life, the fact that, I guess we came out of the ocean. Life evolved on this planet out of the ocean. So moving 30,000 litres of Atlantic seawater into one of the primary galleries in the Royal Academy and mixing it with a bit of England, a bit of Buckinghamshire. It was just a provocation to say, I want to bring the condition of outside inside the city and allow us to think about what our relationship is with the primary elements in a time of massive, you could say, digital explosion. We live in a cyber society, and I think that re-engagement with first-hand experience of the elements was a very important part of that show.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of elements, one constant in your work has been your use of different metals for many of your pieces. I believe you work in your own foundry, and steel is a very important part of the monumental piece, Angel of the North, which is in Gateshead in the UK. That was completed in 1998, and given that you were making a piece of public art that was to be viewed by everyone, how did that affect your creative process? Did it influence your approach?
I think that sculpture has always been a collective activity. And I think the Angel of the North is an example of, I couldn't have made it without the shipbuilders that actually knew how to bend ship steel, that knew, in a sense, the language of steel when put into naval architecture. And that's where its form came from. And I guess that idea, which is probably a tribal idea, that sculpture can be about collective experience and made collectively and then occupy collective space. I think that's a tradition that for 200 years was lost, and now I would like to think is being found again.
And that piece was made with financial support from the UK Arts Council, local funds and European contributions too. Yeah,
the European Union gave £150,000 towards that, which I am very, very grateful for.
Indeed, I believe that public backing of the arts is something you support, and you joined some very high-profile artists in 2010 in an open letter urging the then Culture Minister, Jeremy Hunt, not to go ahead with cuts to the arts. How do you see the situation at the moment in the UK 10 years on?
Well, things are changing rapidly with our new Chancellor and our new Prime Minister. I think that it's difficult to predict what's going to happen under Boris's realm. However, there has been an absolute reduction in state funding of education in art in Britain, and along with it, the support of museums that thankfully have remained free, but are still struggling, I think, in a time in which, sponsorship, certainly from the oil industry, is becoming more and more problematic. And I'm hoping that the new Chancellor and the new Prime Minister will be resolute in replacing funding that has been removed from our national institutions and from the arts generally.
Now, speaking of public versus private commissions, your recent interactive installation, New York Clearing, was part of a larger contemporary art initiative piloted by the Korean pop band BTS. What prompted you to say yes to their project?
I think it was visionary and extraordinarily generous. I mean, it's unusual that a group of 19 to 23-year-olds that are basically interested in making music should suddenly make $5 million available to a group of artists and think of the idea of making 5 major shows in 5 major cities globally. Cultural bridges now are more important than ever. We can see throughout the world this, in a way, as a result of fear, a return to the nostalgia of national identity and religious certainty. And I think we need to certainly resist that, what I conceive of as backward thinking, with an idea of collective creative projects of exactly this kind.
Touching a new generation there as well. Now, finally, we asked you to flag up what's on your cultural radar at the moment, and you told us about a contemporary dance performance of Bluebeard, choreographed by Pina Bausch. Tell us what it is about that piece that got you interested.
Well, this is extraordinary because I hadn't seen it, and it was restaged. It was a piece that Pina Bausch made in 1977, and it was restaged at Sadler's Wells, and I was completely knocked away by Well, just the radicality and the passion of this work that deals, if you like, with issues of sexual diversity, with issues of the whole of the Me Too movement, the idea of male power, and, in a sense, the rise of female awareness. It was prophetic, and still now, at the beginning of a new millennium, this work that was made in the last quarter of the last packed such power and was so moving and so critically relevant that I thought that, here is a person that has really changed the landscape of art.
A visionary indeed. Well, that's definitely one to check out. Antony Gormley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll leave you with a clip of Pina Bausch's unique lyrical language of dance. And do remember, you can get more arts and culture on our website, and we're also on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
Claudia Scheinbaum is the first female mayor of Mexico City, a city of 22 million.
Estas audiencias son muy importantes, primero porque uno le pone los pies en la tierra de los verdaderos problemas de la ciudadanía. Para mí, gobernar tiene mucho que ver con escuchar.
This left-leaning politician is up against major challenges, such as persistent inequalities and concerns ranging from security to all sorts of shortages.
Me van a dar una pipa porque somos 7 de familia en la casa.
Yo lo que quiero es justicia.
Mexico City's Madame Mayor faces adversity, but says she is determined to build a cleaner, greener and fairer city. Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.